Hey BoLS fans, what's up? JR here, and today we are taking a look at the Adventures in Middle-earth Player's Guide. This is a player's guide and campaign setting for 5th edition D&D, everything a player needs to create role-playing characters for the world's greatest fantasy setting. And of course, it uses the world's greatest role-playing game rules. It's 5th edition, it's great. It has everything you need to start playing in Middle-earth. If you're a player or a DM, you can pick up this book and start changing and tweaking your own campaigns. This book has a lot of cool new stuff. There are 11 new cultures, there are 6 new classes, there are 13 new backgrounds. There's a whole guide to kind of storytelling in Middle-earth style. So if you want to make your games feel a little more literal epic, if you want to make them read like an epic poem or story or saga, this has got what you want, including rules for dealing with corruption, getting audience with famous people, and also a new fellowship phase. And we're going to take a look at all of those, but first we're going to start off with this gorgeous map. This is the Wilderland map. It kind of is an area that is like the starting zone for Middle-earth adventuring. They carve out their own little section of the world and show it off, and what would a Middle-earth themed book be without a gorgeous hand-drawn map? Now here's the table of contents. As I mentioned, it starts with the Wilderland. This is the area where your first adventure begins. Then we get a look at an overview of character creation and what it means to play in Middle-earth. You get your cultures, which are basically your D&D races, but they're reimagined for Middle-earth. So there are a lot more variants of humans, and there are even a few surprises. Dwarves, elves, hobbits, and Dunedain, for one. You also get a look at the 6 new classes and how they fit in. You get a look at the virtues, which are a bit like feats. You get a look at new backgrounds, equipment, rules for going on journeys, rules for dealing with the shadow and the creatures of the enemy, rules for getting audiences and interacting with other cultures, and rules for the fellowship phase. So let's start with a look at the Wilderland. As I say, this is a guide to where you're going to start your role-playing campaign. It's a place of adventure where you're sort of at the fringes of civilization and the wilderness. You might have like a safe place that you're hiding out, but there's also a dangerous edge to it. Places where the shadow is creeping in at the edge, because this takes place after the Battle of 5 Armies, but before Sauron's final defeat. Then, of course, we get an overview of what everything's like. We're going to kind of go through everything a little bit, so let's skip past that. We'll talk about cultures. Now, these replace races from traditional D&D. You'll find all the usual dwarves and elves and hobbits here that you might expect, but you also find a number of different humans. There are bardings, there are beornings, there are Dunedain, who are Numenorian men and women. There are dwarves from the Lonely Mountain, elves from Mirkwood, hobbits from the Shire. You also get men of the Lake, men of Minas Tirith, riders of Rohan, and woodmen of Wilderland, which is a new one created for this book. It's pretty cool. Each of these races is pretty fully fleshed out. It has everything that you would expect. You get a lore section, you get a description and like a list of names. You also get what their standard of living is, which is an interesting new wrinkle on things. You get your starting equipment, an ability score increase, your adventuring age, your size, speed, and other feats and things that you start off with for being that. We'll take a look at some of those later. For now, let's go through the 6 new classes. As I said, there are 6 classes. They are Scholar, Slayer, Treasure Hunter, Wanderer, Warden, and Warrior. Each one kind of encompasses many different aspects of other D&D classes. The Scholar has a lot in common with like the Bard and the Cleric. These are all about knowing things. These are scholars who make the wild a less threatening place because they have learned its secret lore and they know how to find secrets out in the wild. They know how to use like plants, they know how to heal people, they know how to hear news from afar, and they can speak to a lot of different people. If you're familiar with playing like a skill monkey class, like a bard or a skill-focused rogue, this is sort of a good analog for what this class does. They don't get like sneak attack or anything like that, but they're very much a great support class. You want to have one of them around because they're always going to know something to keep you around, and they'll know the secret lore of birds and beasts and how to read the natural world and all that kind of cool stuff. There's also the Slayer. These you might expect just looking at the art. These are very much barbarians. They even have a D12 hit dice. They have a Battle Fury, Reckless Attack, Unarmored Defense. It's pretty much a barbarian with just like a couple of different wrinkles and different features. They have their Slayer paths, so you could be a rider, foe hammerer, or I think there's only the two, but they have a different flavor and a slightly different focus at what you're going to be doing when you take your subclass. But other than that, pretty similar. Treasure Hunter, also very similar to the Rogue. These ones straight up are. They do get sneak attack. They do have expertise. They have all of that stuff that you are used to, with a couple of different wrinkles. You can be an agent where you're like a little bit of a spy and you make friends easily, or you can be a burglar and go on an adventure with 13 dwarves. Then there's Wanderer, which is very much like a combo of the Ranger and the Fighter. This is very much a, if you're wanting to play Strider, this is the class for you. You combine like the fighting styles of some of the fighters with like the classic Ranger stuff, but instead of spells, you have a whole host of other options. This is a cool option even if you're looking to play like the D&D Ranger but want a different look at it. The Wanderer is a great jumping off point. They are very non-magical, as most things are in this place. There's the Warden, which is a sort of paladin or cleric analog. These are defenders. These are the people who are dedicated to fighting the shadow and the enemies, the monsters of the enemy. They have an ability called the Warden's Gift, which allows, it's basically like bardic inspiration, so there's a little of that, but they're all about fighting evil and figuring out the best ways to do that. They can do it by counseling people. That's one of their subclasses, the Counselor, and they can provide great aid to their allies, or you can be a Herald and you can champion everyone. There's also the Warrior, which is straight up the fighter. That's what they do. They fight. They have fighting styles. They wear all of the armor. You get two subclasses, the Knight and the Weapon Master. You don't have any battle maneuvers or anything like that. This game kind of has a different focus. And that is all of the classes. Then there are virtues, and I'm not going to go through all of these because these are different like feats. There are cultural feats. There are other different feats you can pick up. They're all different virtues. We might look at one of them. Let's say Royalty Revealed, which is available only to the Northern Dunedain. But you belong to a bloodline of kings, and that lets you do a couple of different things. You can take a bonus action to reveal yourself in battle. When you do that, your allies immediately recover a d6 plus your charisma modifier and hit points. Your enemies within 10 feet make a wisdom saving throw against a 15 plus your charisma modifier DC. If they fail, they're frightened of you for a minute, and they also gain a special hatred of you after they're frightened. They will look to attack you and your kindred whenever given the opportunity. If you do this in a social encounter, the individual, if you're talking to someone who respects the legacy of Numenor, you get extra bonuses when dealing with them. But if they hate Numenor, then they'll gain hatred for you. There's a lot of cool stuff like that. These feats are a lot more, they have some cool combat abilities and kind of make up for the lack of overall magic, but they also have a lot of cool role-playing like wrinkles and things like that in here. We'll kind of look at some of how that plays out when we get to the section on gaining audiences and stuff like that. For now, we're going through backgrounds. These are different, classic backgrounds. There are a few different ones like Emissary of Your People, or my favorite, the Fallen Scion, which is the last of a powerful bloodline, or at least that's what you've been told. You have Noble Bearing, which means you can interact very nicely with the nobility, but you might also be a black shield, which is basically, if you want to play Strider, that's the way to go. You kind of keep yourself hidden until you really need to. Once we get through all of that, it talks about new equipment, different armor, different stuff like that. There are no magic items in this game, at least not the way you expect them, so it's kind of a nice refresher. Then we get into the rules for going on a journey, because a huge part of The Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit is going from one place to another, and they have different rules and different roles for how you're going to get through that. Basically, you decide what you're going to be doing and playing your route. Your DM decides how perilous this journey will be. You start off, you go on your embarkation, where you might have a guide, a scout, a hunter, and a lookout. Then, depending on how you're doing, you'll come across different events, and you'll have different tasks to accomplish. These vary based on what you are trying to do and where you are trying to go, and there's a huge section of different things that you might come across as you're playing this. I really like this system. I think it's great. I'm kind of looking at ways that I can lift this for my own non-Middle-earth campaign. It's really cool. Similarly, so are the rules for dealing with the shadow. This is kind of making evil feel more evil. It makes it feel like a miasma. There's a lot of corruption that goes on here. You can get you can get blight and taint and deal with the consequences of your misdeeds. Evilness kind of manifests itself in different ways. You can become degenerate based on what you do. You can become weak based on what you do. You might become prideful, you might become murderous, you might become spiteful. There's all kinds of cool stuff. This is a very neat way to reimagine like alignment. There are consequences for your action. They have real mechanical effects and role-playing effects, so you actually feel them. I think it's a really neat thing to consider lifting. Then, of course, finally we have audiences, which is ways that you're going to get to talk to like kings and queens and important nobles, because there's a big part of like common people trying to get in touch with the rulers, trying to make them listen to reason, and they've replicated these rules here. It all kind of is based off of the diplomacy rules out of D&D, but with a few interesting tweaks. And then we get to the fellowship phase, which is like your downtime activities. This is when you're in a safe place. This is a session of play that's driven by your choices. Instead of just adventuring in a fellowship phase, you get to decide like, what are your stories? What are your ambitions? What are you wanting to do? They have it's a way to pass the time, but also say like what you're up to while time is passing. It lets you further your own goals. It lets you do things like recover from injuries, heal your corruption, meet patrons, open up your own sanctuary, build your own house, research secrets. And then, of course, finally we have look at character sheets, and that brings us to the end of the book. You get all the summaries and indexes, and there's a hex map of everything, because hexes are sexy. And that is the Player's Guide to Middle-earth. I like it. I think there's a lot of cool and interesting stuff in there. If you're looking for a lower fantasy game, or are just looking for some cool new abilities for your D&D campaign, it's worth checking out. If you want to play in Middle-earth, then you need this book. And it's a great place to play. After all, that's one of the huge inspirations for D&D, along with Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser and all those other classic fantasy novels. It's great. Definitely check it out. I'm JR from the Bell of Lost Souls. Thanks for watching.